AI is getting scary good, so I thought I'd put it to the test, which is, can AI solve a challenging business problem better than a strategy consultant? So I'm going to share a real business problem that you'd find in any organization. Then I'm going to create a framework to break it down and solve it. Then finally, I'll test whether AI can solve it better than I can. So we'll work through the business problem step by step so we can understand exactly how the AI evolves its thinking as it gathers more information. And as we go, I'll provide my thoughts on its approach. So here's our business problem. Imagine that we're a consultant and this is the business problem we've been brought in to solve. A cable TV company from Canada called Worldview had recently entered the US market in the Northeast to expand its market share. Now, Worldview saw this move as an opportunity to capture a large part of the US market, about 4 million consumers, in a market with very little competition. However, in the last couple of years, much to the surprise of management, Worldview has been unable to make a profit. So we've been brought in and hired to figure out why and advise them on their next move. So how would I break this down? Well, fundamentally, the question is asking why Worldview didn't achieve profitability in the US market. So I'd use a profitability framework. Now, there's a pretty standard approach that we can use here, and it involves breaking down the individual drivers of profitability, and it looks something like this. Now, by the way, there are multiple ways to break this down, but the way that makes most sense to me is profits broken down into revenue minus costs. Then we break down revenue into number of customers times revenue per customer. And then finally, we split costs into fixed costs and variable costs. Now, if I was a consultant tackling this profitability problem, that's the basic starting point that I would use to help break down the problem. Now, a framework like this highlights to us that Worldview is not achieving profitability for 4 possible reasons. So one is it has too few customers, so scale is too low. 2 is it's not generating enough revenue per customer, so price is probably too low. 3 is fixed costs are too high, and 4 is variable costs are too high. And as a consultant, I'd then test each of these different drivers of profitability. So basically I gather data, run analysis for each of these, and the results of the analysis would reveal what is causing the profitability problem. So that's how a consultant would tackle this problem. So now let's ask ChatGPT and see whether it understands the problem, whether it can identify the root cause, and most importantly, whether it breaks down the problem in a structured and logical way like we did earlier. Here's the prompt we'll give it. You're a strategy consultant and you need to solve this business problem. Ask questions one at a time and share your thinking as you work through the problem. Then we'll just copy and paste the business problem. So let's see how AI tackles it. The first question that ChatGPT asks is, do we know how many customers Worldview has acquired in the US market? So it seems like a totally reasonable question and probably something I as a consultant would ask first as well. And the AI goes on to explain that it's trying to figure out whether the issue's on the revenue side or the cost side of the business. And this gives us our first clue that there is an underlying structure that it's using to guide its questions. Because if you look at our original framework, the first layer is revenue versus costs. And it seems that's also how the AI sees the problem. So anyway, let's answer the AI's questions. So we'll say, according to our case study, Worldview has captured 1 million customers, which is about 25% of their original target. And interestingly, I don't think this is quite the silver bullet that the AI was looking for. So if Worldview had 100,000 customers, then it's obviously a revenue problem. If they captured 3 million customers, it's probably a cost problem. But my gut feel is that 1 million is in the gray area, it's in the middle. So let's see how AI responds to this. It says that 1 million customers is a decent foothold, and then it lists 3 hypotheses that might explain the profitability issue. So here's what it's hypothesizing already. 1, costs are too high to support profitability at this scale. 2, price isn't high enough to generate sufficient margin. And 3, they're hitting the ceiling on growth and can't spread fixed costs further. So if we compare that to our 4 initial hypotheses, we can see that AI is actually at a similar starting point. It's looking at costs as a whole, price, and scale. Very similar actually to what we looked at in our framework. So let's see what it asks next. The next question that the AI asks is, what is the average monthly price customers are paying for Worldview service in the US, and is this the same price they charge in Canada? So with this question, AI is trying to calculate the total revenue that Worldview is generating, and it's also trying to figure out if the price is different between the 2 markets. So let's respond to this question. In our case study, customers are paying $40 USD per month, and this is the same in both markets. What does the AI think about this? Well, it seems to think that top line revenue is quite healthy, and it's saying that it believes the issue is probably on the cost side of the business or with market fit. And look, you might be wondering, where does market fit come from? Well, I want to highlight something super impressive. So let's remember that the AI has only asked us questions about customer acquisition and price, but it's actually realized that if Worldviews kept the price the same in the Canadian and US markets, then it implies that they might have just simply assumed that US customers and Canadian customers will behave exactly the same. And that's honestly incredible. It's literally reading between the lines like a human might do. So we'll come back to this soon. Anyway, where are we now? Well, after asking this question, the AI seems to have ruled out the hypothesis that price is too low in the US because it's the same in both markets. And now it's focusing on these parts of the framework. Total costs are higher in the US market and scale is too low in the US market. By the way, if you want to learn how to break down complex business problems with frameworks like this and solve them using a hypothesis-based approach, then you should check out my strategy system, which I'll link to in the description below. Anyway, now that the AI has narrowed down on costs and scale, let's see what it asks next. The next question that the AI asks is, are the costs to serve a US customer roughly the same as in Canada, or are they higher due to things like infrastructure, licensing, or support? So we're now seeing the AI test its hypothesis that profitability hasn't been reached because costs are higher in the US market. So let's respond. In our case study, Worldview has high fixed costs in both the US and Canadian markets. That's immediately disproven the hypothesis that total costs are higher in the US market. So by the process of elimination, the AI has landed on the hypothesis that Worldview's profitability issue is because they don't have enough scale in the US market to absorb their fixed costs. And the AI puts it quite succinctly. It says, in other words, same costs, but not enough scale yet. It's basically saying this: fixed costs and variable costs, and therefore total costs, are the same between markets, and price, therefore revenue, is the same between markets. So we can use this one graph to show the effects of scale. So break even is when revenue equals total costs. Anything above break even is profitable. Anything below break even is unprofitable. And as you can see, the US is at 1 million subscribers and sits here below the break-even line, whereas Canada is here above the break-even line. And that's what AI is fundamentally saying about the profitability issue. The US doesn't have enough scale. But it doesn't end there. Impressively, AI wants to confirm this last hypothesis that the US market hasn't achieved break-even scale. And it asks that question directly. It asks, do we know how many subscribers Worldview needs to break even in the US market given their fixed cost base? It's literally trying to confirm that this main hypothesis is true. But the case study isn't so easy. We'll respond by saying, we don't actually know what the break-even point is, we just know that they're not breaking even now. So let's see what the AI thinks about this. It's saying that Worldview's break-even point is significantly higher, and it's hypothesizing 1.5 to 2 million subscribers. But I want to pause here again to say that this is also super impressive, because if you've ever seen my videos on storylining, on hypothesis-based problem solving, on action titles, you know that I always harp on about uncovering the so what of the data being a core skill of a consultant. And right now the AI is doing just that. It's trying to figure out whether Worldview is close to breaking even or whether it's never going to get there, because those two things have very different implications for Worldview. If it's close to breaking even, then maybe it's a matter of investing in scale. But if it's not close to breaking even, then maybe it should really just cut its losses and exit the market. So at this point, the AI has really narrowed down on its hypothesis that low scale is the core of Worldview's profitability problem. But let's see what it asks next. The next question the AI asks is, what kind of product are they offering in the US? Is it the same traditional cable TV bundle as in Canada? So you'll remember that earlier the AI discovered that Worldview didn't set different prices for the Canadian and US markets, and based on this it suggested that Worldview may not have localized their products. So now it's actually validating this. So we'll respond by saying, yeah, Worldview is offering a traditional cable bundle just like in Canada. And what does the AI think about this? Well, it's suggesting that Worldview has entered the US market with an old product, traditional cable, and the market's moving away from traditional cable to things like streaming services, and maybe that's why Worldview hasn't achieved scale. The other thing worth mentioning is that the AI seems to be happy with the hypothesis that scale is the fundamental issue with Worldview's profitability problem, and now it's focusing on the why, i.e. what's the reason that scale is so low. So let's see where it goes from here. The next question the AI asks is, do we know anything about why the other 3 million potential customers didn't sign up? Again, this is another example of the AI being laser focused on the why. It's trying to understand whether customers didn't sign up because they don't like the product, because they're not aware of the product. Again, these will have very different implications for what Worldview should do. So we'll respond by saying that It turns out that consumers are hesitant to pay $40 per month for cable. And based on this, the AI has identified that there's a misalignment of the perceived value of the product with the price, especially if consumers have access to low cost or free alternatives. So basically the current product sits here, the price is above the fair value line, and if Worldview wants to address this, they could either decrease the price or increase the value. So the AI asks one final question, let's see what it is. The AI asks one final question, which is, are these consumers avoiding all paid video services like streaming too, or is it just cable bundles they don't value? And in our case study, it turns out that they're not paying for streaming services either. And it seems that for the AI, this is the clincher. The US market is highly price sensitive and consumers are not willing to pay for video content. This means that there's a fundamental mismatch. So in summary, the AI has found that fixed infrastructure costs are high in a cable TV business, but Worldview's scale in the US market isn't large enough to generate sufficient revenue to cover those fixed costs. And scale is low because the US market has a low willingness to pay for video content, so there's a fundamental mismatch. But what do I think? Well, when I first started filming this video, I assumed that the AI would struggle. I thought that it would ask me some random questions, throw everything at the wall, and maybe eventually stumble on the answer. But look, I must say, I'm genuinely very impressed. Firstly, the AI solved the business problem in only 7 questions. And honestly, do you think you could get it right in 7 questions? Look, I don't think I would, and I literally teach a course on structured problem solving. And secondly, speaking of structure, the AI clearly used a framework implicitly in its thinking. For example, it started on the revenue side and then it moved to the cost side. It also started at the high level and then went more into the detail as it asked more questions. Thirdly, it synthesized information in a way that felt actually very human. For example, it used the pricing information to induce that Worldview may have assumed that both markets behave the same. And finally, it didn't stop at the what, which is that Worldview didn't achieve scale in the US market. It continued on to solve for the why, which is the mismatch between consumer preferences and price. But what could it have done better? Honestly, not that much. I think it did pretty well overall. But as a next step, I think it'd be interesting to test the AI in a similar way with a more complex or ambiguous business problem. I think profitability problems like this are easy to break down because profitability is an equation, but something like market entry might be a little bit more challenging. So drop a comment below if you want me to test AI with a more challenging business problem. And finally, if you want to go deeper into how you can use AI to improve your thinking, then check out the video on screen now where I share 5 AI prompts to think like a strategy consultant.